This is not Restless. Okay, I know you just want to get to the show, but I'm actually here to tell you that there's a way that you can get even more Restless in your life. You can do that by going to patreon.com/The Restless Podcast, where there are 3 different ways, starting at just $3 a month, that you can both support this show and at the same time get even more content. At least 1 extra episode a week, and often more. Not to mention the Restless Telegram channel that you'll have access to 24/7 to interact with all the other patrons. If you want more Restless in your life, this is the way. Go to patreon.com/The Restless Podcast. Okay, back to the show.
All right, get ready, everybody, because here we come. This is Restless. Pastor Michael, we just had to start with that celebratory playing of The Lord's My Shepherd, Psalm 23, sang by a stadium of fans.
I love it. I love it. It sounds great, man. We should do that more often. Fill stadiums with psalms.
Oh man, we definitely should. And tonight we are living out that dream, because tonight the vibes are up. Restless has more than 250,000 downloads worldwide. So this is your podcast, Restless. I am your host, joined by Pastor Michael. We are a postmortem on the young, restless, and reformed. You can think of us as what late night DJs might have sounded like in Geneva when they were spinning those greatest hits from the Psalter. So this is who we are, and I am happy to be here with you, Pastor Michael. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. I know you are always broadcasting from your bunker, and tonight my background looks a little different. It almost looks goofy, right? Like the contrast of colors where I am in the lighting is pretty rough. So I'm in my kids' homeschool room right now, and so there is, this lovely, I don't know, what do you call this color? Like seafoam green, teal-ish. It's some mix in there. So it's different. Anyway, it's a little bit different, but here I am. I'm excited. Matt, how crazy is it when we first sat down to just talk about, hey, we've got some friends that are having these conversations about the young, restless, and reformed. Maybe we should do a podcast about this. And here we are. That's pretty fun. It's just fun. I know we've gotten a little bit of flack for maybe getting too big of heads in what we're doing. I don't think that's actually true, but it does feel kind of crazy to be at this point, even if it's very insignificant in a certain way, right? 250,000 downloads. In one way, that's very insignificant. In another way, that's a big deal, at least for us, I think. So congrats, man.
That's right. It is. It does feel good. It's been really fun, right? 2 guys from nowhere who knew no one online to take to where we are. And obviously, people with actual notoriety get 250,000 downloads on a single episode that they post. So don't worry. You don't need to worry about us getting too big of heads. Actually, both you and I got to hang out with people who listen and support the show in the last week. Shout out to Nick and the guys I've met up in Madison, Wisconsin.
Yeah, no. So I was just down in Memphis for the General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church in America, and got to hang out with both Brad and Dean. two guys that we're connected with via the Patreon. I didn't get to hang out with them as much as I wanted, but it was really fun when we did get to have some time at least together. And it was just fun. What's fun about it is, we've now had a lot of conversations online with these folks. So it's nice to actually put a real person behind just the text on a screen. Maybe you've seen a picture of them, but to actually hang out and realize, man, these are just really great guys. It was a blast. It was really fun. I also, by the way, let me give one more shout out. I don't know if Micah will be listening to this from the Portland area, but on my way to General Assembly, I go to fly out of the Minneapolis airport, and I heard over my shoulder a couple of guys talking about RPR and the RPR report, which if you're in the PCA, you know that RPR is the Review of Presbytery Records. And I knew nobody else is talking about this. so I know these guys are heading to General Assembly. So I turned around and I said, hey, are you guys by chance heading to General Assembly? And they said, yeah. And one of the guys looked at me and he said, hey, do you do a podcast? And I said, I do. And he said, I listen to the podcast. And he actually had one of our shirts from the Restless store, which you can go find right now, by the way. You can go over to therestlesspodcast.com and find a shirt. But he had the Ecclesiology Matters shirt with him in his bag. And I just happened to bump into him at the airport. Wow. Now, again, to deflate any possibility of, big heads, that means not much because I'm heading to the Presbyterian Church in America General Assembly, where there's going to be a larger chance that somebody there listens to this podcast. But it was still fun. It was fun to meet somebody that way.
Pastor Michael, don't be too humble. You are out there IRL getting recognized by people for the show Wild. Maybe someday I'll leave the bunker. I'll go to a place where people like that hang out. I was asked in the live chat if I'm drinking anything tonight, and I think the only appropriate answer is claw is the law when you're celebrating 250,000 downloads. But I was actually inspired by both our Patreon chat and the conversation I had with these guys in Madison for what should we do to celebrate 250,000 downloads? Well, we're going to do two things. Someone shared in our Patreon chat, which you can join, by the way. And as part of celebrating 250,000 downloads for the rest of the month of June, you can now join for a 7-day free trial at both of our levels, our entry level and our purely Presbyterian level. And if you would like to join for the next week and attempt to listen to the hours and hours of additional episodes.
I don't know if you could get through it all. I could be wrong, but I don't think you could.
But for the rest of June, we are going to make 7-day free trials available to everybody. So that will be fun if you'd like to join. But someone in the chat we have for our patrons shared this article by the Religion News Service, which is about that the YRR, the Young, Restless, and Reformed, our people, where we come from, our roots are at a crossroads. And so the reason I want to share this is and talk about what is the direction of things, what is the future of the YRR is I was talking to men, Michael, I would say they seemed about 10 years younger than me, right? 10 years younger than me. And they were talking about themselves like they were young, restless, and reformed. Like they were having the same kind of experience, coming to these ideas from similar sources, and then having to figure out what to do. And using that language. Now, obviously, some of the names and the kinds of events were updated, right? They weren't, right? They weren't talking about King's Kaleidoscope and Mars Hill and all the things we talk about as much. But I just found it so interesting that I'm wondering if part of what we're looking at is a potential new cycling through of the same kind of experience for people, and if it is even on a fairly large basis, because obviously people have always started heard R.C. Sproul on Christian radio, and come to certain convictions. So Religion News Service thinks we're at a crossroads, and we very well may be. And so I thought it would be useful for us to talk about it. And we are going to end this segment before we just do 25 minutes of celebratory yay, nay, or nuance with me positing to Pastor Michael a few of the crossroads I think the young, restless, and reformed are going to have to face. And we will be playing a game of which way, new Calvinists. And so I will be positing a few directions things could go, and Pastor Michael will be answering with what he actually thinks the direction will be, not what he wishes it will be, but what he actually thinks
All
the
right.
direction will be. And so we're looking forward to it. And so everyone who is in our live chat tonight can also give us their opinion on the direction. Also, they can play along with us for yay, nay, or nuance. So we hope it'll be fun. We hope it'll be a good time. And but let's go to the article. Let's take a look at the article that I mentioned. So the article is a little bit retrospective, happening after Tim Keller passed away.
Now, before we even get into it, Matt, should we say that there's one just massive oversight in the article that they leave out? They
Yes.
never once do they mention the largest podcast currently, I believe, about the young, restless, and reformed.
Correct.
I just, it's hard to do a postmortem without the podcast that's been doing it for the last several years.
The longest running postmortem on the young, restless, and reformed, and the original rise and fall of the young, restless, and reformed show.
Right.
And so you are right. It is a bit of an oversight given we have 250,000 downloads. And unlike TGC and other more new Calvinist aligned things, I actually have no reason to believe anyone at Religious News Service actually would ever listen to something we've said. Though, shout out to our good friend, Brad Vermerlin, who is quoted in the article.
We're 1 degree away.
We are 1 degree.
Brad's been on Restless. He's quoted in the article. We're 1 degree away.
So again, journalists are always kind of looking for ways to frame a story, and they frame this with Tim Keller's death. Pastor Michael, in reality, other than giving it framing for a story, do you actually think that is is that a real moment in the YRR movement? Is losing Pastor Keller and his gain into glory, is this really something that will change the YRR movement as we know it?
That's a good question. In a certain way, of course, because he was such a figurehead. But when you think about Keller's interaction with the Gospel Coalition, the other, kind of elements of the YRR, he's kind of pulled back from a lot of that stuff over the last number of years, where he hasn't been as present as he maybe was early on. And so that seems to me to say he was much more hands-off toward the end and less involved. And noticeably, even in this article, they barely talk about Keller at all.
True.
They mention him a tiny bit at the beginning, basically, and that's it, right?
Yes. I think, if anything, I think what we would say is Tim Keller passing, based on how the author discusses Tim Keller and others in the Young, Restless, and Reformed, is the Young, Restless, and Reformed has just lost the one leader I liked, basically, is what it kind of feels like. That they're on a cross.
It totally is. It totally is. It is 100%. We all saw one redeeming thing in this whole movement, and he is now gone.
Yeah. And in that way, they are at a crossroads. Can they produce another single person that I like? Is kind of the question. It's kind of the vibes I got from the article, even though it's asking a good question. Because how do I know it's a good question? Well, I've been running a podcast asking that question for 3 years, so that's why I think it's a good question.
We really hope it's a good question.
um, and at least as I play the host of this podcast, I will continue to say so. So, what is interesting is, again, they talk about the young, restless, and reformed, and this is something we have said many times. I'm going to read it, especially in case we have any newer listeners, which we always do. And it talks about a guy who has joined the ranks of the young, restless, and reformed, a renewal movement born in the early 2000s, fueled by scores of his evangelical Christian peers who had grown up with largely theology free, self helpy sermons and fundamentalist shibboleths of evangelical churches. Instead, these young Christians drank deeply of a theology named for a 16th century French Protestant, Jean Calvin, that was brought to America by the Puritans. And again, I think that this does just set the table for what we were all looking for when we got there. Right? Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. There was just this sense that there was so much more, a sense of almost like you felt like you were starving, and you didn't even realize it necessarily. But the moment that this was put in front of you, the feeling was one of finally getting to like really dig in.
Mm,
And we maybe have come to see that as just the beginning now, just a little bit of a taste. But that is almost to make the point even more strongly that we were looking for something with substance.
right.
And New Calvinism was able to at least bring us some of that.
Yes. Yeah, and I actually like kind of the next thing they describe it as. This reformed renewal became a powerful lifestyle brand that united
Mm.
Christians across denominations and generations.
Yeah.
And again, I think this is what these are the two things you and I are often working out on this podcast. We're in many ways discarding the lifestyle brand, but wanting to keep the theology named after a French Protestant brought to America by the Puritans, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting to put it that way. It is, when you think about, while I was in Memphis, uh, interesting place to do this, but at this General Assembly of this Presbyterian church in America, I had a conversation with a couple other guys about some of the emo, screamo, punk music we used to listen to.
Mm,
And it was a blast. You would have loved this conversation, Matt. You would have had a blast with this. It was such an enjoyable, nostalgic conversation, and part of it was we were at in the basement of this bar in Memphis that was playing all of this music, and so we would, a new song would come on, and we were just it was really fun to kind of reminisce together. Uh, but thinking about that, you think about some of the bands that you followed, and how people you'd buy the t-shirts, you'd go to Warp Tour, you would dress in a certain way that showed that you had some kind of connection to this scene. You would listen all the time to the music that was being put out. And then you think about the Young, Restless, and Reformed. What did you do? What made you a part of it? Well, you went to conferences, right? You went to these conferences where you met up with other people. You'd buy the T-shirts that say, Jonathan Edwards is my homeboy. You would get the books that were published by particular people, even if you didn't read them. It was at least, it was something that you could get. It was just part of being one of these folks. And so in that way, it really did take on this kind of lifestyle brand.
right. And then, of course, you got to drink alcohol. You got to do the you got to watch the movies you weren't allowed to watch. You got to listen to bands that were screamo but said we're reformed Christians. Like we list, like the there was this it it made, and even in many ways how Calvinism, which is really about the doctrine of God saving sinners, really got to be presented with an edge. I have this t-shirt I still wear. It is the nicest material, and this thing may never wear out. Shout out to whoever runs Missionalware, who must have been a huge YRR guy. Missionalware, we'd love to have you on the show, and love to get a number of your items for free. But I got this shirt, and it says post Tenenbrock's Lux, right? It's a black t-shirt, right? There's one of these sayings of the Reformation, after darkness light, and it is a skeleton holding a lantern, right? It looks like some kind of a hardcore band, and it was for the Reformation, and I have that shirt, and I have it. I should wear it on one of these times we go live. But yeah, and so there were all these things that came together because, again, there were always Reformed Christians in the country, right? That's been there's never been none of them, right?
Right.
We've even had, and even as we've talked to Brad, it's even contested how truly numerically significant it was, even though it felt that way. And I
Yeah.
think a large part of it is it was to bringing together this lifestyle brand. So when you did have a friend, as Michael and I were, you always were able to recognize another person involved with it because of what they were listening to, or the way they were acting in the cage stage, the people they were harassing during it, right? The the book.
Unfortunately, for Matt and I, by the way, I've said this before on the podcast, I think, but we would only talk. We grew up around each other, and so we knew each other. But we would talk like once a year or once every 2 years, or just like Facebook chat a little bit or something like that. And every time we did, it was like we're reading all the same books, we're listening to all the same sermons. It was just kind of falling down that same path, even though it was completely separated from each other in the day-to-day life.
Right. So then the article comes, and let me make it bigger in case a person is watching along with us and they can then see what we're talking about. They then list a murderer's row of bad endings to pastors in the Young, Restless, and Reformed. They bring up Mark Driscoll, who we have, of course, talked about at length. Tullian Tchividjian, who we have not really talked about. Maybe someday we will. C.J. Mahaney, also we haven't talked about a little bit, and James McDonald, our favorite superhero villain, megachurch
Man,
pastor.
yeah, what a what a
And
guy, huh? And they don't even have everybody, right? I mean,
oh,
you could put Darren Patrick in there. You could put there were others as well that while reading through, I remember thinking, oh, they didn't even include some of these others.
and so they take these, and then of course, they talk about the blow, and all of the things about Tim Keller. Tim Keller, his intellectual purity, personal kindness, right? He's, and so I do think this article then does ask one of the questions, that I may be coming back to Pastor Michael with later, so he can start thinking about it now, right? They say, while the movement remains influential, the controversies and losses raise questions about its future. Now, that's a really unclear sentence, but what they're talking about is the loss of these leaders, either obviously Tim Keller going to be with the Lord, or all these men being disgraced in some form, even though I would like to say that 3 out of the 4, I don't know about CJ Mahaney, 3 of the 4 of them are currently serving in a ministry role somewhere. Mark Driscoll, even James McDonald is still in one.
Is he for sure still doing it? I know he was.
I don't know if I guess I don't know. Just the last time we checked in, he was still trying.
He was the last time we checked in. Man, what a mess.
But the question it does raise, and this is one we've raised, is it does seem right now there is a seeking of a place of where to consolidate leadership and power in what is left of the Young, Restless, and Reformed. Do you think that question and that those positions are in some way still up for grabs?
So repeat that question for me.
So right, they're saying the thing that makes the Young, Restless, and Reformed the questioning its future is the loss of these
Yep.
leaders, right? And so what I'm extrapolating from that would mean is what is up for grabs are these positions of leadership that were at one point clearly held by people at the Gospel Coalition, by people like Mark
Yep.
Driscoll. And that probably some of the stress inside of New Calvinism right now is because there is a question of who will be new leaders and what's left of the Young, Restless, and Reformed.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. I'm trying to, in my mind, kind of weigh the different sides. I do think that there is an element of this when the old guard passes on for whatever reason, whether good or ill. There is always going to be a kind of a, shall we say, a power vacuum,
Yeah.
right? The influence they had, even if it's not going to be an exact thing, right? You're not going to get another Tim Keller. You're not going to get another R.C. Sproul. They were their own men. They had their own, kind of influence and style and audience. And you probably won't have somebody just like that will take over right where they left off. But it does leave some of those, some influence up for grabs, for sure. But part of me is thinking, if we really see this as primarily a lifestyle brand, then the reason that some of these things are changing is not actually because the moving on or dying off of the old guard. It's actually more so that the style has changed. The culture has changed. It's like when somebody spends, a lot of time following one particular band. But as that band gets older, as you get older, you start to, maybe you still have a kind of nostalgia for them. So you can, be in the basement of a bar in Memphis and hear a song and chat about it with some friends. But it's not driving a lot of what you do, right? You're not going out of your way to get to Warped Tour. You're not buying the merchandise anymore. You move on, right? So styles change, lifestyle brands kind of change, and they move with the culture around you. And whether you like it or not, you're probably a part of that. And so I wonder if some of what's happening is much more that the culture itself has changed. The culture that really the YRR, kind of exploded into is distinctly different now, although there are some similarities. And I do think that maybe there will be some kind of repeating of what's going on, but it's different. And so I don't know. What do you think? I don't know how much weight to put on either of those.
I do actually really like this idea that that the with the styles changing, right? This leads, right, everyone wants to know what's going to be in style, like what will be in style after winsomeness is not in style, what will be in style after Mark Driscoll won't be in style. Or someone like Mark Driscoll's asking himself, can I reinvent myself and get a role on Blaze TV or the Daily Wire, right? Like those are stylistic questions. And the sad thing about it is that, but the truth is whether it's a style brand or all these kinds of things, actually, why does everyone why does, no matter what your quote unquote, let's say YRR style is, everyone loved RC Sproul, right? Like everyone had a regard for Tim Keller, even this author of this article who doesn't like anybody else, right? But not everyone's like sold on JD Greer as the next,
Right.
the next leader, because the truth is, if you want to end up being in style, substance wins. Substance does win. And so it does actually probably map a place that if you are willing to be a person, again, it won't be in the same way. You're not going to be able to redo what Renewing Your Mind did. You're not going to be able to redo what they did on terrestrial radio. If you're willing to express these doctrines in a substantive way to lots of people and do it over and over, that probably is a path forward.
Yeah. This is so, you think about, I was thinking about this the other day because I somehow came across a picture online of these three young men at Ozfest, right, where they were listening to all kinds of, just kind of dark metal bands. And I don't know. This was from maybe I don't actually know when this picture was taken. Maybe the early 2000s, something like that. I don't know when Ozfest has gone on. It looked like an older picture, right? And the people in this photo, these three young men, look goofy, right? They've got these just like super baggy parachute type pant jeans and, big chains. And, one of the kids has the really just like spiked hair all over the place. And it just looks goofy. It looks silly. But when you look at photos from the last 100 years or even more of, say, a man in a suit, the suit hasn't drastically changed, a little bit here and there, but generally speaking, you look at it and it looks somewhat familiar. And it doesn't, it just hasn't changed that much. And so it's interesting to me that, and obviously over the course of history, that changes some, but in the course of just the way that styles change in it, over the course of a century or so, you have certain things that stay relatively the same. And because of that, you look back and you don't think, oh man, that looks so cheesy. It looks pretty normal. It looks pretty straightforward. I wonder if that's a good analogy for what it's like when you just preach the truth in season and out of season, and you just teach what really are these basic doctrines of the faith all the time in different ways, maybe in different formats, maybe to different audiences. But what you get over time is probably the cumulative effect of looking back and saying, okay, that wasn't lame, right? We look back at some of the stuff that, the YRR has done, and we'll look back now and we're like, oh, that was lame. But like you're saying, a lot of those were the style things.
Yeah.
It wasn't the substance. And when you look back at the substance, we're still thinking, wow, that's actually really good. That's actually really profound.
And speaking of substance, I want to shout out two things they talk about with with how it was put forward through publishing, right? Again, this is the thing that made the YRR different than most of the other youth movements we knew about. The other youth movements tried to get us in with the best music, all the, the coolest things, charismatic experiences, extreme sports. I mean, you name it, and it was done in the evangelical church while we were growing up. But again, even Driscoll said, I'm going to preach for an hour. Right? Even Driscoll was saying that. J-Mac, right? I'm going to preach for an hour. All of these this is what they were bringing in. Now, there are two things I find very interesting about this. And by the way, we will not be reading the quote from Kristen Dumez. That might be a lifetime embargo. But let's just yay, nay, or nuance. This is the right way to characterize the Gospel Coalition, Pastor Michael. So they're talking about the influence of publishing. The internet allowed web-based apologists, such as the Gospel Coalition, whose site draws 10 million viewers a year in the US alone, to issue a constant stream of arguments. Pastor Michael, I just found that fascinating. Do you think the Gospel Coalition is best characterized as like a some form of apologetics?
Yeah. No, although they published some of that, but I guess if you take it as this attempt by Keller and Carson to claim the center of evangelicalism, in that sense, maybe it is a kind of apologetic to Christians, right? It's a kind of apologetic for a particular brand of Christianity. And so maybe in that way, I've never thought of it in those terms for
I
sure.
know, I am neither.
But that's really that is fascinating to think
And
about.
and again, I think it might only make sense that way if you are a complete outsider to this. You're a more mainline Christian or whatever writing for the religion news service. And every time you go to the Gospel Coalition, it's like the way you should think about this 5 things, right? Like you see this
Yep.
and you're like, man, they want me to think something. And I just think that might be a helpful thing for us to think. Coalition is everything they do is an argument for something. Now, here's the other thing I found fascinating about what they described in particular with the publishing. So they talk about how they think in large part the movement was able to exist because in 2001, Crossway published the English Standard Version.
Very interesting.
They highlight the translation using mankind and men to denote human beings, which favor a complementarian reading of Scripture, right? The Crossway did this when, the NIV goes to gender neutral language. And this is what I found fascinating. They see it as, this historian described it in resemblance to dispensationalism. And we're not going to describe, all of what that is, but dispensationalism, because it had its own Bible, it was spread through radio broadcasts, and low cost publishing. And that rapture theology became this like test of, are you in or are you out, for so many people. And now Calvinism comes along and adds to it, or replaces it for many people, with soteriology of God moved first, God acts, man is passive, and salvation becomes the new standard. Then we publish the ESV Study Bible, which I don't know. I think it's probably at least in our circles, for sure, right? This is the most used study Bible, and it's going to give, at least broadly, Calvinist friendly answers, right?
Yeah.
What do you think about this idea of the fact that we all suddenly switch translations?
Yeah, this was the most interesting piece of this whole article to me, because for a long time I've thought about the effect of the Schofield Reference Bible on the growth of dispensationalism, and it's just been an interesting topic. Not that I'm an expert in any way, not that I've done too much reading on it, but it's just something that I've always thought about. The way that various translations spur on particular movements within the church. And for whatever reason, I've just never thought about the effect of the ESV in this circle, which is crazy because we have a whole podcast about this. And I don't think we've ever talked about the ESV particularly. And part of it is it's just such a big topic to try to deal with. But the ESV is what I most use still, despite knowing that there are places where it maybe isn't the best translation in the world, but it's still the one I use most on the regular basis. It's what I preach from. And it is probably the most typical one that people around me and in my circles use. So yeah, really interesting. I'm not sure how much, like what comes first in this case. What is the chicken? What is the egg? I'm not positive, but definitely they grow together. And probably in a lot of ways the ESV Study Bible does spur things on. I remember at various times speaking with people who would, want something to go a little bit deeper than just, bare reading of Scripture. And I would recommend to them something like the ESV Study Bible. And so I could see that being something that did kind of start moving people in this particular direction.
Yeah. Now, this fall, we are going to do some of the origin stories of New Calvinism. We're going to go through some of these kind of seminal things. We're going to go through the origin story of TGC. And man, I have wanted to do the ESV Study Bible. Again, it is such a big topic, I just don't know how. So if someone has a recommendation of a guest who has actually looked into this or is pretty familiar with the translation philosophy, we would love to interview that person. But these are things you can look forward to. So let's keep going, because man, am I looking forward to 25 minutes of yay, nay, or nuance. I think we probably have to play the song "Pump It Up." Am I right about that? While we
for 25 minutes.
The whole time.
As long as it's quiet enough. But sometimes when you play the song on here, I don't know why, but sometimes it doesn't come across on the video, but I can't really hear you when you have music playing. I don't know why that is, or we'll maybe be able to get it to work. But I've noticed that in the past. So if we can get it to work, we probably do need to have it playing.
We'll see what happens. So if we don't, if you are listening on the podcast, you may get the joy of me just editing that in, because that is how I want to listen to this. So shout out to Brad Vermerlin. We're not going to read his quote, but I want to read these two final critiques before we move on. is they talk about that there wasn't real mentorship of up and coming people. As Reynolds says, there was a way in which if someone said they were called, looked good in skinny jeans, and could quote someone who was dead and pop culture, then you could become a leader. Now, they say that this isn't mentorship, and obviously, in a very real sense, this isn't. But these are people learning to play the game and going, oh, wow, this is what it takes to be a leader. Here I go. Right. And it is shallow, and it is not substantive. But I think it is fascinating that, again, for all of us, because we're interacting these things online through conferences, it's like, can I present some of these ideas in a way to my friends, right, that comes across this way? Or if I was older, a church planner, can I learn to talk this way? And this is what the level of mentorship was happening. And that makes sense if we're calling this a lifestyle brand, right?
Yeah, so you don't have, it's interesting even thinking about that power vacuum or influence vacuum or whatever you want to call it, as some of these men move on, that, yeah, they were not actually discipling those under them. Now, at the same time, of course, sometimes these, you will always have, when you have a John Piper,
Yep.
it doesn't matter how much he disciples the next guy.
Right.
Chances are that next guy is not going to have the same kind of influence that he does. Maybe that's not true in every case, but generally speaking, that is the case. For whatever reason, there are some men that are just, they are particularly gifted, and they will draw a following that is there for them. That may not be what we think is ideal, but it is just the case. And so it's still interesting, though, to think about how much there an explicit discipleship of those that would come up after. And that's something to remember for us too. If you're in any kind of leadership role, ministry role, something I've tried to do even now is start thinking about and praying about, hey, how do I raise up the kinds of men that are just ready to take over when I'm gone in whatever sphere I am a part of. Is there a way to already be doing that, or to be looking for the kind of person that would do better than me, and I could hand things off to even sooner? And so I don't know if I don't know that I do that well, but I do think that seeing how little of that is done in these circles is probably a good reason for us to push into it a little bit more.
Now, the final kind of critique they give as they think about what's coming next is they say one of the problems was that this movement wasn't Calvinist enough. At which point I went, hey, that's kind of what we've been saying. And then
and no.
And then they said the next sentence, which made me feel like I was talking about a different meaning of Calvinism. So here we go. Anderson says she regrets the movement wasn't Calvinist enough. She believed the movement mainly focused on salvation, but missed a broader emphasis on common grace and the goodness of God's creation. Those ideas that God is at work everywhere and not just among the elect few matter. For some leaders, she said, the lack of balance led to a certainty of belief that lacked kindness towards anyone who disagreed. I don't know if you would like real Calvinism if it caught you.
So what's actually being talked about is actually neo-Calvinism,
right.
that is represented by Calvin Seminary and others. And you see the fruit of that in many of the people they're quoting, right? You see it in Dumas and others. Their understanding of Calvinism is a completely different thing than we would ever recognize. There's a good, obviously, in understanding common grace and the goodness of God in creation. And I do think that sometimes within New Calvinism, there was, and this isn't just New Calvinism, I think this is true of basically most Reformed thought since the turn of the 20th century, but in a really, I think an overreaction in some ways to a lot of the progressivism and earthly postmillennialism in the early 20th century. There was a firm insistence on total depravity by the stalwarts, by the godly men who were standing up against what was an anti-Christ movement within the church in a lot of ways. And I think that that's become then something where, okay, now every doctrine is read through this one, right? Everything is seen through this one. And so there could be a healthy corrective. That's not what they're talking about. They don't mean that. They're not talking on that level. And if you and I were to say, and we have said, hey, it wasn't Calvinist enough, it wasn't Reformed enough, we're then going to say, should have pushed deeper into covenant theology.
That's right.
Right? Should have pushed deeper into the regulatory principle of worship.
That's right.
You should have pushed deeper into some of these things rather than just stopping at a very base level understanding of soteriology. We're not on the same team. Is what I'm saying.
Should have done a study of providence and gotten to the part in the institutes where you went, whoa, free will, right? Like,
Right.
You learned these things beyond. But yeah, no, I think this is a great show idea. Why New Calvinism isn't Neo Calvinism, because I do think that is a certain move there are people trying to say.
Yeah, interesting. Very
and,
interesting.
and I think it would just be helpful for people to see, because those are both two influences, and they're not the same really at all, running congruently together. But the article ends with someone joining the Presbyterian Church in America, even though they no longer feel like they're part of the young, restless, and reformed, which is all right. But this draws us to a segment I have been very excited for, Pastor Michael. Which way, YRR man? Which way? And so, Pastor Michael, are you ready to be faced with some of the crossroads I think we might be facing here for the young, restless, and reformed?
Yes, I'm ready. And so I'm supposed to answer what I think will actually happen, not
Yes.
what I desire to happen.
Yes. And so this does have a visual element, but because, again, we are an audio show first, I will be explaining what each of these images mean. But so if Pastor Michael reacts before I say anything, it's because he's seeing something that's bringing him mirth and joy. So here we go. So here's number one. Which way, YR man? The 50th Presbyterian General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church in America made a comment about how there are two denominations growing in the United States.
Yes.
One is the Presbyterian Church in America, which they were celebrating, understandably, and we celebrate with them too, of course. And the second one is the Assemblies of God. The Assemblies of God, we might call the evangelical, mainstream leaning kind of Pentecostal denomination, right?
Is that their actual logo, by the way?
It is. It's at least one of them.
Gotta update that thing. Gotta update that logo.
The thing I love the most about the logo is that it in the Bible it says all the gospel, which definitely gives me all the heebie-jeebies when I read that coming from a charismatic leaning. But Pastor Michael, the question is, which way will the YRR break? Now, we know the YRR brought together charismatic elements.
Yep.
Brought together confessional reformed elements of confessional reformed theology. Which way do you see these things breaking?
That's wow. This is a tough one for me to answer. So I know both of us as well as many others in the PCA right now who just followed that track of kind of broad evangelicalism or maybe nothing into the YRR, into confessional Presbyterianism. And it is a very distinct pipeline that has been at work and seems to continue to be at work in various ways right now. I am not as aware of that into the Assemblies of God. However, we do have our favorite AI, Charlie Self, who happens to be evidently part of the Assemblies of God, and he's writing regularly for the Gospel Coalition. We obviously, I think you can see that the vast majority of YRR churches would be more comfortable, I think, in the Assemblies of God than in the PCA because of the emphases, because of the style, especially those that have that lifestyle brand of the YRR as opposed to just the doctrine. I mean, it seems to me that would be much more at home in the Assemblies of God. So I guess if I had to decide, my assumption would be that the YRR will be moving much more in the direction of the Assemblies of God. But I would put the caveat that I hope I'm wrong, and I hope more of us are coming into the PCA.
It will be. I don't know enough again about the inner culture of the AOG. They would have to become comfortable with Calvinistic soteriology.
Yeah, are they? I don't know.
It's a great question because
if you are Assemblies of God, let us know. Or if you know folks there, is that Calvinism acceptable? I'm not sure.
Is that why Sovereign Grace exists? Because they are charismatic, but they couldn't do it within. Could they not do the Calvinism within the AOG? I don't know. But Pastor Michael, am I allowed to ask you a bonus question to these?
Let's do it.
All right, here's your bonus question on this topic. The question is then, what would either of these things mean for if you're thinking of the YRR breaking towards the AOG, would that have an effect on evangelicalism at large?
It would, because I think that the YRR has basically shaped much of the evangelical conversation for the last, decade. In the way that we've talked about, it's normal now for a church to at least claim that they do some kind of expositional preaching.
Yeah.
I don't think that was normal, 2 decades ago within the broad evangelical world. I don't think that it was something that you would have talked about. It is far more normal now, I think, to consider yourself reformed. You would use that language. We may differ on what exactly that means, but at least being more Calvinistic. It is much more normative, I would say now, to consider yourself complementarian, even if that literally means nothing, because well, we can still have women preaching as long as it's done under the authority of elders. So even if it doesn't really mean anything, it's normal for people to at least claim that title for themselves.
Yeah.
And so in that way, it has really played a major role in shaping the evangelical conversation. Part of this is my ignorance of the Assemblies of God. I know some folks there. I'm somewhat aware of them, but I really don't know enough to know if that would be a move simply just back toward a lot more typical evangelicalism with maybe a heavier handed charismatic side. I don't know.
Yeah. The reason I don't know the answer to this question is because I feel like evangelicalism at large has basically accepted all of the charismatic presuppositions. So yes, I don't know,
totally,
unless they all start becoming practicing Pentecostals, I don't know that it could have much more influence than it already has. All right.
That's interesting. Yep.
So that brings us to number 2. Which way, YRR man? Are our future leaders going in the direction of Colin Hansen, at the helm of the Gospel Coalition, Tim Keller's biographer, the original guy who wrote the book, coining the term young, restless, and reformed, or the man, the myth, the legend, the monster, Pastor Mark Driscoll? Michael, which mold is the YRR going to fall towards?
So this is purely experiential.
Okay.
but it seems far more common for young men who we would consider somewhat YRR right now. It seems far more common in my experience for them to actually be listening again to Mark Driscoll. A lot of them not having grown up listening to him like we did, right? A lot of them not having been around during his downfall. But a lot of guys seem to be gravitating toward Driscoll once again.
Mm.
And it seems to me that the Colin Hansen brand is much more of those who have been around already. Like they've been around for a while. They are not the young anymore, maybe we could say. They're still in these circles, but they're not. They've kind of mellowed out a little bit, and so I don't know this for sure, but my gut is telling me that there's a move again toward Driscoll, which I don't like, by the way. I don't think that that's healthy or good, but I do think that that is. I think he's tapping into some things again, some different, but some of the similar things that he was tapping into when we found him.
So you're saying the young men you know aren't listening to Colin Hansen's Gospel Bound podcast?
Right.
We,
Right.
we
Oh, I've actually I've never met somebody that I know of who's listening to that podcast. I'm hearing more and more of particularly young men who are beginning to listen to Driscoll again.
well, um, shout out to you, Colin Hansen and Gospel Bound. Pastor Michael, here's the question though. Here's our bonus question for this category. Pastor Michael, is there a third way? Is there another kind of leader that another mold of leader we could we could get behind it? Give us the third way. Be
Wow.
one of the good leaders like Tim Keller who present us the third way.
Yeah, I hope so. And actually, in the chat earlier, somebody mentioned when we were talking about this power vacuum and those that may gain some of this influence, somebody mentioned Kevin DeYoung. And though
Mm,
I don't think DeYoung will end up having the same kind of maybe broad influence as someone like Tim Keller or even maybe like a John Piper, I do think that he will take on a lot of the influence, and I think it's really healthy. I think that Kevin DeYoung is a solid guy, right? Ride or die with KDY.
that's right.
I think that he's in a good place, and so he may be one model for what this could look like. And my real hope, and I think both of our hope, is probably that uh, people begin to really gravitate much more around the ministry of the local church,
Mm,
or of something that is closer to home, somebody who is actually able to provide oversight, accountability, actual shepherding to you. So that's my real hope. I don't know if that will happen or not.
so I guess that I won't ask the question is does that mean you hear young guys talking about the podcast or blog The Clearly Reformed with Kevin DeYoung? Kevin DeYoung, we love you. We'd literally love to have you on this particular podcast. I can show my RTS diploma if that would help us get you on sometime. All right, Pastor Michael, since we've been talking about lifestyle brand and culture, let's bring up a cultural topic now. Which way YRR, man? The case for Christian nationalism. So Christian nationalism or Christian libertarianism. So Pastor Michael, I am bringing up these kinds of attitudes towards political engagement.
Yeah.
And let me actually, and it's not just because we've had guests present both. This isn't completely self-serving, but part of it actually comes from my own experience that when I was young, so that again, when 10 years ago, when I was like full in to the YR, maybe it's been a little bit longer than that. I hope not. I hope I'm not that quite that old yet. Um, the talk of the town was libertarianism,
Yes.
finding like libertarianism, and it feels like in online settings the talk is now around what is Christian nationalism, are we Christian nationalists, what should we do? So this is why I'm asking, which way is the YRR going to fall? Are they going to fall with the Christian nationalists, whoever they are, or the Christian libertarians, whoever they are? And obviously, I'm using Christian libertarians specifically because obviously we know there are some pretty dumb forms of libertarianism,
Yep.
and whatnot. So,
Yeah, right now it seems like there is just a huge groundswell of movement toward some kind of Christian nationalism, right? Not necessarily what Stephen Wolf presents only, but the general feel seems to be this desire for a more kind of self-willed Christian influence in the political arena. I don't know what that means long term, but right now that's the feel on the ground. This is both as I think about things online, but also just on the ground with just regular people. I think that there's a move in that direction, at least again, not maybe the exact program that Wolf lays out, but a move in that direction, away from a more libertarian approach.
now here's my bonus questions. Will either of these, whatever way the YRR would fall in large part, will either of these actually have an impact on American politics and culture beyond the Twitter spats in Reformlandia?
Wow. I have no idea. I really don't even know how to answer this because I feel like I have no clue whether this will actually change anything. I don't know. I really don't know.
All right. And I don't know. Now, Pastor Michael, this last one is a bit self-serving. So this one is actually which way restless. And so the question is, what will Restless's tone be going forward? Will it be the restless tone people know? And I would love to say love, but actually regularly write in to tell us is off the mark about. Though again, no one in my real life has ever brought this to me, or the other side, nuance. Which and you can answer this in how yeah, why don't you answer this in what you think will happen, and then I may as I promised to some I promise to discuss tone again before we got out of here. Which way do you think we're headed?
I guess I have to just pick with where we've been, right? I just can't imagine us changing that much moving forward. I imagine that we will stay about the same. I know that for some people, it's usually, by the way, having to do with particular items we discuss. It's not usually the general tone of our show. It's usually, hey, you said this thing about, my favorite pastor, or you said this thing about this book I really like, or this TV show. That tends to be when we get any comments about the way things are. But here's the deal. We had, since this is a 250K show, we can talk about maybe some of the reviews or some of the stuff we've gotten in from listeners. One of the things that we got at one point recently, it was after we did our atheist show. We had somebody write in, and I won't mention who they are because they said they didn't want to be named on the show. But this was a woman who said that she is an atheist, and she listens to the show. She started listening when we started to do the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill stuff, and has found it really fascinating and interesting and liked the show. And if you remember, our show about atheism was called Atheism is Cringe.
I believe.
I believe atheism is cringe, which it is. It is, and we still stand by that. But this woman had it was just a really nice email. I hope that she's not far from the kingdom based on reading this email. I don't know, but that's my prayer. And I told her we'd pray for her and her salvation. But she titled her, she put under her name at the end, she included the adjective cringy, which I just found so great. It was just really, it was one of those things where you think, okay, I know that there are people that listen to this, and if we use the word cringe to talk about, what they see as their belief system, they're they're unhappy, they're mad, and they would think, hey, you've not been kind enough, you've not been, sweet enough. And here's somebody that hears that and like had a really good attitude about it. If you know Matt or I in person, I think that you would find that we don't say the things we say if we ever say them in a harsh way. And we may be wrong sometimes. We may really the chances of us crossing the line sometimes is basically 100% when we're talking this much. It's usually late. It's to just you and me, as far as we can tell. And so the chances of us crossing the line is pretty high. And we want to be willing and able to repent when we need to repent. What I'll say, though, alongside of that, is that we're not intending, when we use strong language, or when we're having fun, when we're making fun of something, we're not doing that in such a way just to belittle, just to attack. But it really is. It's for different reasons, but it really is because we're just having fun. And
right.
If you met in real life and you made the same kinds of jokes about us, if you laughed at us in certain ways, if you make fun of this podcast that we do, and how we're live streaming to like 4 people, I think we would laugh. Okay, I don't think that we're going to be hurt by that. And so just realize that's the context where it's coming from. We're not trying to attack anybody. We're not trying to hurt anyone. We seriously just want people to know the truth more, and this is one of those ways that we have found to be able to do that.
Right. I do think I again, this comes up. We do love, I do hope everyone can have as has thick of skin and as good a sense of humor as our atheist friend did. I hope you do. I hope you do. And that doesn't mean everything we say is right on or spot on, or we always handle things the way we should. But again, remember, you are listening to Reformed Drive Time Radio. That is what we're going for here. If you listen to Pastor Michael preach, it doesn't sound like this. We do agree with you. There are appropriate tones at various times.
Yep.
However, again, I'm going to say this, and I've probably said this basically every time we've ever done a feedback show. What I do defend is the idea that we get to use every tone used in the scripture, which does indeed include mockery, rebuke, humor, laughter, lament, joy, mirth, right? Like all of these things are included. And I also think while there is a sinful way to use tone, right? I think that we probably have talked about times where potentially Driscoll crossed that line. There are also times we still enjoyed the tone he struck, because what I think is we live in a time where, and I've said this before, probably too, we do need 10% more of Luther's energy. We just need just a little more willingness to speak directly, to call things out as we see them. Right. But what I realized as I was thinking about this is I do get it though. Pastor Michael, we have said we are talking to people that were in the YRR and kind of now don't know what to do. We aren't talking to people in general, though some we're thankful for, who have kind of thought through all the things we've thought through or talked about as we've talked about this for 3 years. And if you've never heard a criticism of Big Eva, I actually can really sympathize why, when I'm willing to laugh out loud, that might be really jarring to you. Because you've never even heard someone voice, I don't know about that. I don't know about that, from one of these big names. Right? And I do think that is striking. I do think, as I continue to think about this, the one thing I wouldn't want, and this is where I think about this, and this is why it's good to do this on the 250K show. The one thing I wouldn't want is a listener to not share this show with someone that it might be helpful with because of our tone. Like if that is always happening, that would be a bummer. Also, at some point, and I don't know what point that is, and I don't know what I would do if I got to that point, when you are speaking to so many people for the sake of being clearly reformed, good guy KDY, you do need to change the way you speak, right? I probably can't drop subtle hints about James McDonald's character, right? If I know I'm speaking to, let's say, 10 times the amount of people I'm speaking to right now. And so there is a point where that comes in. Now, but I agree with you. This is the one thing I want to point out. I do think most people like our sense of humor till we talk about their thing. This is the thing that drives.
This is what we all do, though, right? I mean, we all do this. We all enjoy, kind of laughing at the expense of something until it hits us personally. And it's just a good exercise in humility to be able to laugh at yourself and to be able to laugh at the fact that others find something about you or what you do funny. That's okay. It's an okay thing to do.
I had a great time. I got to be a guest. They were doing something called TikTok Theologians, which is secretly what I just wish we did on our podcast now on Semper Doctrina. And the TikTok theologian they chose in this case was actually Francis Chan. And I'm really laughing. I feel bad for them because I got them in trouble because I started laughing, because Francis Chan has recently in a short interview said like he wants to go to his death being known as the one promoting the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, that this is what he wants to die as. And the reason it was funny is because Francis Chan has wanted to be that guy on about 6 issues.
Everything. Everything he's ever done or preached, right? He's always so like over the top earnest,
Yeah.
I mean, it's everything.
And so what I encourage the people that maybe were disheartened by this seemingly Roman Catholic tendency and some of the ways he was talking, that he'll probably get a new thing. But that was unwelcome. And so, but what I just want to encourage everyone with is, if it's funny, it's funny, right? Just if it's funny, it's funny, and it's okay. And it's good to have a sense of humor. The other thing I do want to give everyone an out on is it is also possible, based on your experience, people you've learned from, things that have helped you, things that have hurt you. You may have an allergy to the way I talk about something, the way Pastor Michael talks about something, or a subject we talk about. And I don't blame you for that. It may not be able to be enjoyable for you or helpful for you, right? And I use the word allergy because I have some kids with a severe allergy. There are just things I don't keep in my home that are fine for everyone else, right? And that's okay. Our show is our show.
Yep.
And so I don't know if I've gotten any further in talking through what the future of our tone will be. All I can say is it is something we think about. People we know in real life listen to us and would be able to tell us if they thought we were in huge error with how we were speaking about an issue. And I don't know. I know I'm being recorded when I speak. The things we say, we know are being put out there. It's all I will say about me. I think you would enjoy us in real life. But Pastor Michael, speaking of all this tone stuff, I think it's time to get to the thing everybody really wants. And you need to tell me how the audio on what I'm about to start for you is. Can you hear this at all?
I can hear it. Oh, it's coming through.
Oh, it's coming through?
Yep, and you're coming through. It's all clear.
Oh, good. So that means we get to do it. So here we go. Pastor Michael, yay, nay, or nuance? We have 20 of these. I don't think we're going to get through them.
20 of them. Holy cow. Yeah, that's a lot.
But here's the good news, everybody. We are going to record a Patreon segment the next time we record those where we finish these. So if yours did not get answered, I promise you it will in a Patreon episode. So here we go. Pastor Michael, let's start with, these are going to come in hot, by the way. Some of these are good.
Oh, boy.
And and all the requests for grace we've just made on tone for the last 10 minutes, all
It's so gone.
about to be shattered. So here's number one, Pastor Michael, as a pastor in the state of Wisconsin. Professional football is a fourth commandment violation.
Oh, most of the time, yes. Most of the time, yes, it is.
Why is it? Help a poor Packer fan tuning in for the first time.
I know. So I'm actually preaching on the fourth commandment for the second week this coming Sunday. So maybe you could just tune into the sermon where, I really won't go hard after professional sports. But I do think that ideally we, along with all of our neighbors, would be having a day on the Lord's Day that's set aside that everybody, if they were able, could go and worship, except for in cases of works of necessity that may keep you providentially. But anyway, so I have to say yes.
So you're saying if there was like an RTS president who's been an NFL football coach, that would not be the greatest look for?
Oh boy, yeah, I suppose it's probably not ideal. But the nice thing is that you can always grow and change. And, I don't think that the Sabbath command is one that we should use, by the way, almost like the spirit. We shouldn't use the Sabbath command in the spirit of Judaizers, because the command is all about rest and it's all about the rest that God provides, the freedom that he provides, that has to be understood in light of what he does. But I am worried sometimes that guys can take it and make it a kind of a burden on people in such a way that it crushes them rather than actually helps them to see the beauty and the goodness of it. So in that way, I would say I want to be careful about how I explain it. I'll be careful of my tone on this one. But yes, it is ultimately a violation of the Sabbath.
Here's how I know it's a violation of the Sabbath, by the way. I have this coaster I got here in Wisconsin, and it says Sundays are for football. There's nothing. It literally just said this is what the day is for.
It is, right.
And there's debates about exactly what the recreation command understanding in the Westminster Confession is forbidding. And if it ain't forbidding professional sports and all of the industry that goes around it, that thing isn't forbidding anything. So it probably is forbidding that. All right, here comes number two, Pastor Michael. Get ready. Sorry, some of these are going to be tough pills. TGC will not exist in, let's go with 10 years. We were giving out 5 or 10 years. I'm going to give you 10 years.
I think TGC will exist in 10 years. It may look a little bit different, but I do believe it will exist. You have to realize something with so much money behind it, if I'm honest. I mean, just the amount of money behind TGC, and I don't just mean like, wow, they're all so rich, but the money, the people involved in it in various ways, that takes so long to actually just die, right? Look at this. I'm not making this comparison as a one-to-one, but think about some of the mainline denominations that people have said forever that how could they possibly last when they're hemorrhaging so many members and they're just not doing things in such a way that actually is seeing any growth, and yet they're still around. I mean, they can hold on forever. And so even if you think that TGC is in that camp, which I don't, by the way, I don't think it's in the same camp as a mainline church, institutions have an incredible ability to just hang on, to just cling on. So 10 years for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I agree, Nay. It probably will exist. You already don't know 90% of the people writing for them and talking for them like you knew their founders. And there is just so many people with jobs and money and careers to keep that thing going and raise money, even if it is some of the BlackRock Soros money. But moving on from that to a question about a writer of a book of the Bible, Pastor Michael. Yay, nay, or nuance, the Apostle Paul wrote the book of Hebrews.
Yeah, so I tend to say yay on this one because I don't know, but I say yay just because of some of the the thoughts of the early church because of the content of the book. Although I have heard, for instance, maybe this was, it is more of a sermon. And Paul does say that he doesn't come with any kind of, brilliance necessarily, or outward excellence when he came to the Corinthians. And so that makes me think maybe not, but I tend to think yes. I will accidentally say at times that Paul wrote Hebrews. I just assume that was the case because there was some early testimony in that regard. Maybe Paul, it was from Paul, but it was written. The rhetoric of it was maybe a little bit of a flourish put on by Luke. I don't know.
I think something like what you just described in the last setting is probably the most likely. I don't think the actual writing can be from Paul himself because of in Hebrews 2, where the person talks about we heard from them, the person seems to place themselves outside of the direct influence of Christ and the apostles. Now, maybe we would say this is Paul talking about himself being untimely born, but I do think it would make a lot of sense if someone is taking Pauline sermons or something like this, like his companion Luke, who in his gospel, like the book of Hebrews, uses some of the most technical Greek in the New Testament. So, an interesting idea. Pastor Michael, now this next one is coming right at the ESV. This is a translation question. Pastor Michael, are you a noted Greek scholar, good with translation issues? If I need in the weeds here.
Man, I'm not, but I know Matt is, and he can help me out if I fall short. So.
All right, yay, nay, or nuance. Malakoi in 1 Corinthians 6:9 would be better translated as the effeminate or effeminate men. Pastor Michael, I'm going to open up that verse while you get ready to answer so people
can... wow. The worst part about this is I don't want to pick nuance because then I'm going to be called Malakoi. People are going to start calling me effeminate if I pick nuance. But I think I have to say nuance. And here's why. Because on a technical level, I do think it's probably best, in my understanding, to translate this along with arsenokoitoi as talking about the two different places, basically within a kind of homosexual relationship. However, I do think that those who want to translate it something like effeminate are getting at a good point. I love that you're just laughing. They're getting at a good point that this speaks to more than just, for instance, the physical act involved in this particular sin. And sometimes the emphasis being put on this physical act takes that sin, and people say, well, therefore it's only talking about that. There's no broader implications for how somebody lives outside of that. So, for instance, you could say, along with side B, gay Christianity, the revoice crowd, hey, as long as I don't physically act on this doesn't say anything about how I'm living, what I'm doing. And that actually isn't true. So in that sense, I do think that it speaks to the sin of effeminacy. I just don't know if that's actually the best way to translate it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I guess I'll share my thoughts. I of course will not be choosing nuance because you're not going to catch me doing that. So let me read it in the ESV, which and then I will read it in the KJV. So here's the ESV. Or do you not know that the unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be deceived. Neither the sexually immoral, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor men who practice homosexuality. The list goes on, by the way. And we just don't have time to get to the end of it. And the good news is and such were some of you, by the way, but you were justified, you were washed, you were sanctified. So there's a lot of good news coming at the end of this. But here's the KJV. Know ye not that the unrighteous shall not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be deceived. Be not deceived, neither fornicators, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor effeminate, nor abusers of themselves with mankind. Now, I don't want to open the Greek right now, because there is one way the Greek could be constructed that may make me a little more sympathetic. But I am going to go with a nay. I am going to go with the ESV translators that men who practice homosexuality is probably the better way to translate this. That it is talking about the active and passive partner in this. Now, perhaps if the Greek construction is constructed in a way that these are very separate. Now, I don't think I'm a better Greek scholar than the ESV translator, so that's why I'm not going to look it up. But I will say this: in the past 3 years, I've never heard more people accused of being effeminate than any time in my life ever.
It's
ever.
True.
So even if
it has become maybe the most prominent sin, evidently.
So if you're big on this one, maybe just cool it slightly with calling everyone you don't like effeminate. Because maybe what if you aren't understanding that Greek word right? I do think that even though the ESV doesn't have some of the connotations, it is talking about practice. It does emphasize that there is a ongoing lifestyle. It is not just a simple act, which I do think what you're saying is. And again, can we get to the need to live out life as a man or as a woman as God created? Yes, we can, of course, and we don't need this word to do it.
Right. Yeah, there's other ways to do it. Yeah.
So, anyways, all right, Pastor Michael, we had this one from 2 different sources. So here we go. Pastor Michael, yea, nay, or nuance, women wearing head coverings during the worship service. Every thorn issue just coming at you tonight.
If a woman is not contentious and is not doing it in such a way to look down on and judge women who are not, or bringing a divisive point into the church, a schism into the church because of it, it can be a perfectly fine, beautiful practice. You're more than welcome to do that in a way that's not drawing attention to yourself or something like that. Does the Bible require this of women? No, it does not. I do not believe it does.
Pastor Michael, I just want you to know I have heard people who make that case that you just made called effeminate.
I know. I was just going to say, I bet I'll get called effeminate for that one.
Oh, man. That's pretty bad. So here is the thing when it comes to reading the book of 1 Corinthians, a book I love so much that is seemingly everyone under the sun who has a unique idea brings me 1 Corinthians.
Yep.
And so, again, the head coverings people, it's so clear. It couldn't be more clear. They aren't this. Some of them are, but the people who are going to call Pastor Michael effeminate for that take are also not tongue speakers. Do not have prophets regularly prophesying in their service. And so what we need to do when we come to the book of 1 Corinthians is we have to learn that Paul takes enduring principles, applies them, and he applies them to a specific circumstance. And you have to be able to work through all of 1 Corinthians doing that consistently to understand what things are Paul's consistent principles and what are things for like dealing with a circumstance they were in. For example, here would be one that would have general agreement. We just read, the unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of God. That is an enduring theological truth that Paul then applies in specific ways to the Corinthians. When Paul says, don't get married in light of the present distress, almost no one takes that as don't ever get married. Paul has just put an injunction against marriage.
Right. Although there's a lot of people today that want to use that to back up the idea of singleness as the ideal. But
I, I know because every bad idea, someone can find something in First Corinthians. Because
It's so true. I've never heard you say that, but that's such a good point. It's so true.
Because Paul is writing the most messed up and confused church in the New Testament.
And I love, and it's so good that, yes, it's in the midst of that people find this is where I find the doctrine that I really need to make a big deal of.
Yes. And so I think there is a ton of I love the study of First Corinthians, and I think walking through with people who have this question, you can really sit down and you can think through, how do we understand what Paul's applying, how do we understand what are circumstances, how do these things come together, and how do we apply them today. And so anyways, someone in the Patreon chat shared this amazing meme where it says it's a Lord of the Rings meme, and it says head coverings, and Paul says you need to wear them because of the angels, and then it's a picture of Frodo from Lord of the Rings, and it says, okay, you go ahead and keep your secrets.
That's so good.
All right, we don't have a ton of more time, so we better keep going. Pastor Michael, yay, nay, or nuance? Pastors sitting on a stool while preaching.
Sitting on a stool while preaching, they're welcome to do it. I have no problem with it. So I guess I'm a yay. I wouldn't do it, but it wouldn't bug me if it happened. Let's put it this way. I would prefer a man just sit on a stool behind a pulpit. Oh, so I guess this is what I'm just realizing while I'm saying this, that I'm imagining like an old school, more like rabbinic tradition of sitting in a seat that clearly marks authority, and like, I imagine somebody sitting at the pulpit. But what I'm realizing is that you're actually talking about like the big Eva. It's just me and a stool, and now I have to say no.
I was about to lose my mind. What? I
didn't even. I'm just so sheltered, I guess, that I forgot that was a normal thing that guys do. I don't like it. I don't like any of the minimalist. It's just me and my stool and maybe a little bit of, something I can set my Bible on maybe. But generally it's casual. It's laid back. It's just me up here, guys. We're just hanging out. I don't like any of that.
Yep. Here's how you answer that question. What is the furniture trying to communicate? Mm-hmm. That is the question. And that is why the Jesus can say he sat down to teach. Yes. Because there was a way that an authoritative teacher sat down. In almost every setting, when a teacher in Western culture teaches authoritatively, or someone gives an authoritative speech in the culture or political world, they stand up. They stand. And so again, it's just the question: what is that furniture trying to communicate? All right.
I wrote a blog series through the furnishings of our church one time. You can find it at ccc-pca.org, where I talk about this. I'm talking about the pulpit and what it represents.
All right. So we are going to try and get through 3 more, and that will save us 5 for our Patreon episode. All right. Here we go, Pastor Michael. Men having long hair.
It looks bad, guys. Just get a haircut. It doesn't look good. If somebody from behind can't tell, you gotta cut your hair. You got to do it. It can be longer than my hair. My hair doesn't have to be the standard, but I'm hard nay on long hair on men. Hard nay.
Dear listeners, if you're mad, you can send those tweets right to Pastor Michael. I used to have embarrassingly long hair, is all I will say about this answer. All right, Pastor Michael, because we are trying to fly through these.
It's a shame on a man, right? I'm just going to say it. Let's go back to 1 Corinthians, everyone.
So, Pastor Michael, sorry, I need to state this in a statement, because that's how we do yay, nay, or nuance. Christians are allowed to swear, right? And this is, of course, we are talking about a expletive form of
using particular words, cussing.
Yes.
Oh, man, I just think about how people hear this. Yes, I think yes. Given the proper context, just like any words, given the proper context, they can be used by Christians, right? So strong language that we would consider swearing is used multiple times in Scripture, right? Throughout Scripture in different places, very strong words, words that we would consider a kind of swearing if somebody used a similar word today. However, what I will add to that is that that is very seldom. Okay, it is very seldom. So, does a Christian have the freedom to use various words? Yes. Um, does that mean that a Christian should be known as somebody who is, using this language all the time? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I'm not. It's not a nuance. I said yes, but I do think that proper context is important. That even the strong language of Scripture is used very seldom.
No, I am a yay with you. That, but the command, because the command is that all language and all words be fitting, right,
Yes.
for their context and
Properly ordered, right? They should be properly ordered.
yes, and that that there are times where incredibly strong language, intense circumstances may require something like that. Now, I was thinking about that there is potentially some language that is just so loaded, that is so either degrading or causes such a reaction. There may be at this point no way of actually using it. And
I think that could be true.
And so in that way I might be a nay if that is what we would mean by swearing. But if we're just using the kinds of words your grandpa might have said when he hit himself with a hammer, or like this, what we might call the sailor language or whatnot, right? Some forms of this, then I would be a yay. If we're talking about certain other things, then I probably would be a nay. Now, again, even those, if you are, could you quote those things, right, and do it in a helpful teaching way potentially? But here we go, Pastor Michael. Here's our last one, and it is bringing it full circle. KDY inspired. KDY, come on. And here we go. Rather than seeking God's specific will for my decisions, I should just do something. Yay.
Hard yay. Just do it, guys. Come on.
Just do it. Get some Nike stuff and just do it. Pastor Michael, why are you a hard yay on this idea?
I think that even though Kevin DeYoung already wrote the book and we should know better by now, we're so influenced by this idea of finding just the right thing or reading God's providence to know exactly what we should do, when actually what God has provided for us is the particular place and time we've been born into. He's given us the family we've been given, the gifts that we've been given, and the wisdom that he teaches us in Scripture, the guidance of those who are older and wiser than us to look into our lives and help speak into them. And from that, you can just do something. You can just make decisions and do something. And you don't have to wait on some kind of mystical experience or feeling to guide you. And I actually think that for most people, if you actually took that and actually lived that way, you would find it is incredibly freeing, right? Love God and do whatever you want, right? Just go do something in a way that would please your Father in heaven, and then just do it with all the joy that you can muster. That would make you so much more free, so much more happy. I can almost guarantee that most people listening could benefit from it.
I know I certainly could, and this was such a great reminder for me that, because even now, as I've probably gotten beyond a lot of the kind of God's will seeking, and frankly superstitious things people do, I still know, even recently, there have been many times where I've attempted to read providence, where I see circumstances and go, I know what God must be doing. And that is typically not freeing. That is typically something that traps you. And in light of the great advice found in this short book by Kevin DeYoung, which, shout out to this particular book, when I got married, I gave it to every man involved in my wedding as a groomsman, usher, musician, or whatever, because I thought it was so good at the time, especially for folks in
It
there.
is a great book, by the way. Definitely a good book.
We are going to give it away to the next 5 people that become paying members of the Restless Patreon. So if you want to join the Patreon and listen to a ton of more content, you can basically do so now and get a free great book that basically you've paid for itself, and the book is worth the price of admission. Pastor Michael, this has been the 250K YRR Crossroads Yay Nay or Nuance Palooza. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, Matt, this has been a blast. Hey, everybody listening, we love you guys. This has been just a blast to be able to do this and have these conversations and enjoy it with you. And shout out to all the patrons who we get to interact with on a daily basis. It really is a blessing for us. And so thank you for that. Really, thank you. And we hope that whatever we do, in whatever tone we do it, it will ultimately lead to the glory of God, the expansion of his kingdom.
Amen. I do want to give a special thank you to our patrons. It is insane to think that we have 45 people who have joined the Patreon in the last year. And so it is enjoyable to talk to you all as we do very often. And so we hope you will consider joining them if you would like to support this show. And if you would like to hear upcoming Yay Nay or Nuances on patriarchy, tobacco, the presence of Christ in the Lord's Supper, Van Til, baptism saves, and how we should think about Lutherans, Pastor Michael, those are going to be a barrel of monkeys. So until next time, this has been the Restless Podcast, and we hope you will enjoy your night in Geneva. Go listen to some Psalms and chant them with the boys.